Hello, everyone out there watching today's presentation on Latina Narratives, Learning to Reauthor Your Own Story. My name is Dr. Pamela Fullerton, and I am co-hosting this session today with the wonderful Raquel Ibarra. Raquel, say hi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Fullerton, for bringing me onto this and Latina Professionals. We're so excited to do this with you all today.
Well, this is our first time using StreamYard, using this platform, so we'll see how it goes. I hope all of you can see the presentation, and feel free to post things on the chat. Raquel's going to be paying attention to that, but we are really happy to be here with Latina Professionals today on behalf of Latina Professionals, talking about Latina mental health during Mental Health Awareness Month. And today's presentation, we're really going to focus on what I like to call our narratives or our storylines that us as Latinas have kind of been told to us, these narratives and storylines that have been put on us, and kind of talk about the impact that these storylines have had. As a licensed clinical professional counselor, I do a lot of narrative therapy work with my clients. And so this is stemming from that type, using narrative therapy. So I am in Chicago, just really quickly before we start the presentation. I run a private practice in Chicago. So if you're in Illinois, in the Chicagoland area, hey, Chicagoans, everyone else, if you want to let us know where you're from in the chat, that would be great. And if you are in Illinois, please link up with me after this. That would be great to connect with all of you.
Yeah, and I should add on to that. I'm here based in Los Angeles. I am an associate clinical social worker. I am also a faculty member at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Go Toros! So if anybody, any LA folks, any social workers, anybody passionate about mental health or just Latinx culture, we hope to connect with you on LinkedIn. Both of us are active, and we will be sharing our LinkedIn stuff and information at the end of this presentation. But I love everybody already sharing where they're from. So please continue to share your name and where you're joining from today. We want to get to know everybody in our audience.
Beautiful. All right, let's get this presentation started. Raquel, you're going to let me know if we're doing this right, okay?
I will definitely let you know.
Perfect. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of what inspired me to create this presentation. And, when I do a lot of presentations locally and nationally, and when it comes to the Latinx culture, when it comes to female empowerment, those are things that are really important to me. I started my practice from a social justice and feminist-based lens. And so you'll see a lot of that intertwined in the presentation that we're about to do here. So I always say that we as Latinos, we've been around. We've always been around in the history of the United States, even though our voices have been limited and incomplete. But I say we've always been present, right? And so it's so important to recognize our history has such a significant part in the history of the United States, even if textbooks weren't written on our behalf. And so this session is going to educate and engage any of the participants here today in increasing awareness around the narratives and storylines given to them throughout their lifespan. We're also going to learn how those narratives potentially influenced us and play a role in the way we think and feel and behave. This presentation is going to shed some much needed light on Latina mental health, wellness, and visibility. All right, so here's what I say whenever I'm presenting. I'm like, we've got some tasks to complete. Definitely think it's important to do some research on your roots. Know where you come from.
Dr. Fullerton, just want to, quickly plug in to say that I think we're still on slide 1. I'm not sure if you meant to be on slide 3 with the task to complete.
I am. I don't know how to move that.
So we're seeing the first slide. But, there it is. Go ahead. Yep. Perfect.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to leave it on this view then and see if this helps us.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to do some research on your roots, where you come from, understanding your family's history, because those stories come with cultural wealth, right? That are going to help to increase, our sense of pride, increase our sense of understanding where we come from, increase our self-worth, right? So really important to do that. Then we're going to, talk about developing your own Latina identity. The other day I presented and this woman came up to me and she was like, oh, I'm Latina, but I don't speak Spanish. I just wanted you to know that. And I was like, hey, our identity is not tied with the amount of language we can speak, right? And so we have to recognize us as Latinas, if that's our identity, to own it in any way, shape, or form, regardless of the language that we speak, the fluency of it, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of any of that, right? And so know that we have to have a purpose behind representing ourselves as Latinas. And then the third piece I like to say is make sure you create an action plan after this that maybe includes some kind of reading that's going to help increase your self-worth and self-competency. Maybe create a goal around what you want for yourself, around your health and wellness goals. So that's what we're going to work towards. Did the screen slide change?
It sure did. You're on a roll.
All right, very good. Okay. So, when we talk about storylines or narratives or messages, these are the things that I've heard my Latina clients say to me. The first one is you have to succeed because it's your only option to overcome. So this constant push that has been told to us our whole lives, messages that we hear, this push to succeed, to do more. And I think about these sayings in Spanish that have also been told to us. Échale ganas, puedes descansar cuando estés muerto, dar el callo, ponte las pilas, partirse el lomo, tienes que partirte la madre, trabajar como un burro, right? All these kind of like rough messages that say, you gotta work hard, you gotta do more, you gotta succeed, right? Consider what those types of messages may do to someone when they're constantly hearing those over and over and over again. So if you're using the chat, maybe you could put in the chat, have you heard those messages? What other messages have you heard that are kind of in the same realm? And then I want you to consider, if these are the storylines and the messages that we're hearing, how do we begin to internalize them? What do we begin to tell ourselves, like, if we're not working hard enough, if we're not working 2, 3, 4 jobs, right? If we decide, hey, I feel tired, I need to rest, right? What are those messages that tell us, nope, you can't rest. Nope, you have to keep pushing. Nope, you have to achieve more. So consider that for a second. Raquel, do you feel like you had some of that messaging given to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, sometimes the messages that we've received haven't necessarily been passed down verbally. They've been passed down through what we've witnessed, right? We've seen our parents working when they're sick. We've seen our parents working through holidays and special family events, because you have to work hard and you have to keep your job and keep your head down and really just be grateful that you have, some kind of income. And so for me, I think a lot of the messaging that I received was more was more behavior. I saw my dad and my mom go to work during times that they probably should have taken the day off. They probably didn't need to go places when they were really sick and sneezing or had a flu. There was no calling off, right? The idea of calling off is riddled with so much vergüenza, so much shame. And fear, right? So much fear permeates our culture that these messages that we've talked about, I think, are going to come up in a couple slides, and would love to hear more from the audience in the chat. Like, have you heard some of these messages too?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So, and we don't just hear them verbally, but we see them, right? And I'll talk about that bias that we see in another slide or so. But this is one of the lines that one of my clients said that they internalized, right? So their life feels borrowed. This is what one of my clients said to me one day, and I found it so profound. My life feels borrowed, like it's not even mine, because I'm constantly doing all these things for all these other people. And we had to sit with that and recognize the impact that not even owning your own life has on an individual.
You know, as you
So,
said that, Dr. Fullerton, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt, but as
No,
you
go
said
ahead.
that, I'm also thinking about how many of us saw, for example, our moms have to be paid moms to other people, right? Our moms who were nannies or housekeepers. And I have to venture off to say that that wasn't their dream. Right, our moms, our tias, our grandmas and aunts, like they didn't dream necessarily of becoming nannies, but once they did, they were being paid to do labor that they then had to come home and do again for free, which is a whole other conversation, but contributing to this thought about this life that I live, it's not even my own.
Oh, I love that. Yes. All right. So why do we continue to do this then, right? Now, granted, I tell my clients all the time, there's two sides to every coin. Sometimes there's more than two sides to every coin, right? So on the one hand, having this fire lit underneath you to keep pushing and keep achieving and keep working, sure, it definitely has some benefits, right? I wouldn't be Dr. Fullerton, Dr. Pamela Fullerton, without having that. On the other hand, it takes a toll. It takes a real hard toll that sometimes we don't consider and we don't ask ourselves, right? Does the benefit outweigh any of those drawbacks? So why are we kind of breathing in all these messages? Well, the way that I see it, it's just part of this bias, this implicit bias that we're constantly breathing in, that we're constantly living in. Things like stereotypes that we see about Latinas, that we read about Latinas, that we hear about Latinas, that we ourselves think about ourselves, news and media images about us, right? What does it really look like to be a Latina? What is a Latina supposed to be, supposed to do, supposed to sound like? What are the socialized messages that we're getting as Latinas? In our educational system, what did our schools teach us about ourselves? In many cases, our schools didn't teach us anything about ourselves, right? We were completely invisible in history books. And then conversations we have with our friends, conversations we have with our family, conversations we have during, Sunday dinners, during holidays, during work conversations, right? So all these messagings that we're getting from all these different places, I think of it like a fog, right? We're just breathing them in, breathing them in, breathing them in. And if we don't take a second to stop and say, do I even believe in these things? Are these messages even really meant for me? Are these messages healthy for me? Are these the messages I want to live by? If we don't stop and start doing that and challenging them, then we're just going to keep believing in these biases.
And I think that's when we talk a little bit more about the power of storylines and the messaging, right? And here's some images to illustrate some of what we talk about when we're talking about implicit bias, right? We have Latinas described as sexualized, right? Sofia Vergara is a great example of this, right? Where folks have taken a lot of her skills and like her charismatic personality and have turned it into more of a sexual object. And we've seen that done a lot with a lot of Latinas who've been prominent in U.S. media and culture. I'm thinking of Salma Hayek, somebody who was easily sexualized in most of her roles, and it's something that we end up playing into. Think about magazine covers, think about photo shoots and music videos, and the way that Latinas are depicted in this very sexualized manner. And we grow up more accustomed to that. We grow up a little used to that because we've been seeing it from such an early age. Like shout out to those of us who watched Don Francisco growing up with our parents, right? Like we saw the treatment of Latinas by Latinos themselves. Like that's the gag. We see this kind of description of Latinas as angry, fiery. How often have we heard of the term the fiery Latina, the spicy Latina? And AOC is a great example of that, right? Where a lot of the images that are captured of her are her in the middle of, let's say, a passionate speech where she's making like really amazing points. But the kind of photos that they choose to display of her are some of what we have on the screen right in front of us. Then you have the domesticated Latinas, right? And I'm thinking about all the novelas that some of us grew up with, all of the Spanish news media that we grew up with. And this video is going to be a really good example of that.
Lucy, where's my shirt?
Probably at the cleaner.
Oh, but today's the driving test. It's my most capable looking outfit.
Okay, I called them.
Oh, it's too late now. Oh, and we got another notice from the fire department saying we have to clear out the bush. You said you were going to get Jose to do it.
He's your gardener. Why you don't tell him?
Lucy, you know I don't speak Mexican.
I'm not a Mexican.
Great, what was that all about?
Lucy's from El Salvador.
So?
It's an entirely different country.
Oh, what does that matter?
You get upset if someone thinks you live below sunset.
Oh, okay, so everything is all my fault. I'm always wrong, right?
Oof, what a good selection. So cringy, right? But those are some of the isms. All of us that speak Spanish, we're all from Mexico, or we're all from a Central American country. We all happen to be from the same one. Like, people don't even get the variety of countries that exist in our Latin American diaspora. And the domestication one is also huge, right? The way we just saw this individual depicted, right? She is a nanny, or some people might refer to her as a maid, performing labor in a home, being assumed that she's the only one that can communicate with her other fellow laborer. And those isms are really small, but they end up forming this big image of people to the point where society as a whole, let's say, for example, in terms of where we're all from, there's this kind of like, that's really not funny, but there is this kind of common assumption that we are all from Mexico. And while that seems like a really small depiction, if we were to take notice of how often we've seen that described in media, it's probably far more than we realize because we're so used to it, which is not necessarily the positive thing here.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, right? Other isms that we're seeing. Again, I hear a lot of Latinas talk about their language fluency, whether or not they can speak Spanish, and how that impacts how they feel about themselves and being Latinas. The color of their skin, right? There's so much colorism that happens in our Latinx community, right? So think about nicknames that people are given, La Morenita, La Negrita, or people make comments if you're light-skinned or you have light-colored eyes, or straight hair versus curly hair, or which ones tend to be better. And then I think about how all those messages impact us. I hear a lot of my Latina clients not only talk about the color of their skin, but also their size, right? So think about the nicknames in our culture and our community that we give to people, La Gorda, La Flaca, things like that. Again, those are storylines. Those are messagings that are given to us. And then we take them and we internalize them. And we start to see a lot of issues in our community in terms of our mental health and wellness as a result of taking on storylines or messages that were given to us instead of us creating our own.
And in terms of what stops us from creating our own story and how to fight back in some of these stories, I think the first thing to bring awareness to is that some of us aren't aware that this is happening, right? Some of us grew up hearing these kinds of messages. Dr. Fullerton, as you were talking, I was instantly getting a flashback of my mom telling me to stay out of the sun, right? Because I'm going to get dark, te vas a hacer negra. The irony being that my grandmother was a Black Latina. She was an Afro-Latina. She was a Black woman with an Afro. And it's so ironic that my mother could grow up with basically an Afro-Latina mother and still find a way to pass down the messaging that being dark is not okay. And that's not something that I thought about until I got into adulthood and started thinking about like clothing colors that my mother told me to stay away from because they would make my skin look dark. And there wasn't this question growing up for me of like, why is that a bad thing? It was just something that I accepted as like, okay, I don't want to get too dark. I don't even know what that means. And it's not until, you know, early 30s that I'm like, oh my goodness, like that was extremely colorist. And so implicit bias is a huge part of all of our upbringings, right? Latinx culture is very colorist. That's his whole other conversation. But there is the stereotype threat as well, right? There is this idea. It's not even an idea. There's this reality that anywhere that we go and people pick up on our Latinness, on our Latino-ness, it comes with stereotypes in their heads, right? Of the kind of food we eat, the kind of music we listen to. I was just having dinner with a friend and I was sharing how I don't really like beans. And she was like, oh, that's funny. I thought all Latino people like beans. And it's like, no, actually, I grew up with lentils. I'm a lentils gal. I'm from South America. We do a lot of lentil. And even that moment for her was like, oh, wow, like that's a difference. And the thing here is that the insidious part of this is that this is true in all of us. Like we all have pockets of these thoughts that we just don't actively examine because we're, you know, doing a bunch of other things. There are low numbers of Latinx folks in media and cinema, and the way that they are depicted is very in particular. If you think back on novelas, right? Think of the protagonists, think of your Talias. They were all light-skinned women who first presented kind of raggedy, and then they were beautified when they put on the red lipstick and the big hoop earrings and they did their hair. That plays a really big impact in how we see our Latinidad and how am I supposed to show up as a Latina woman. There is the reality of anti-immigrant sentiment, right? Like it's really been rampant in the last few years due to the kind of leadership that we've allowed in this country. But that is a real threat, and that is going to stop us from creating our own story. I'm thinking about my DACA folks. I'm thinking about the individuals of mixed status households who can't just step out into the world and embody who they are fully because there is an active threat to that. And I say that as somebody who grew up with, my parents have been here for 36 years. They are US citizens. They do not speak English. They still don't. And so that is a fear of mine when they go out into the world. Like, how do people receive them? And it's a proven fear because they've came back home with stories about being told by their own coworkers, like, you need to learn the language. I don't understand what you're saying. And again, we have this, all of that comes together to combine this historical, intergenerational, and migratory traumas. A lot of our parents came here, or a lot of us even came here from other countries. And whether that was you or that was one or two generations before you, there are a lot of trauma that was incurred in that journey that has been passed down to us through beliefs, through values, through fears, through vergüenza, shame. There's a lot of tactics out there to keep us in line. In some ways to fight back, right? This isn't an all-inclusive plan, but reading to hear different voices. One thing that's been eye-opening for me as a Latina, and I explore my own identity as a Latina woman, is the fact that the writing from Latin America is so vast, right? You have writers from indigenous Peru, you have writers from Costa Rica, you have writers from tiny little islands that we haven't ever really paid much attention to. And so reading these voices to hear and learn more about the Latin America diaspora is huge. Joining ERG groups, employee resource groups, or other affinity groups like Latina, Latinx clubs, organizations in your college, in your school, these are really good ways to get familiar with other people from our background, from our culture, because there is so much, right? This is not a monolith culture. We are very vast and broad, and there's a lot to learn. Start a new club if one doesn't exist, right? Latinas are great at advocacy. Like, let's put something together. If you don't feel represented, create the thing to make you feel represented and to help others. If you build it, they'll come. And this journey to heal, right, through whatever professional services means to you, whether that's a curandera or whether that's a psychologist or a social worker or any of the people that work in mental health. And the journey to heal is connected to our historical, intergenerational, and migratory trauma, right? Again, it's not something that is explicitly said. Like, I don't know about you all, but I didn't learn about my mother's immigration story until maybe 5 years ago. And I'm in, mid 30s, and it took such a long time for me to hear how my mom got here, how she got my siblings here and my dad here. And so even though they may not be explicitly telling us their stories, we have incurred the trauma of their stories by the upbringing, in the ways that we were raised, right? The ways we were kept out of the streets, the way we were overly protected to the point where we didn't get as much life experience as, say, our white peers or our other non-Latina peers. Advocacy is huge, right? I am extremely passionate about social justice taking place through political advocacy. And so joining your Latino organizations, making your own, paying attention to the bills that are out there that impact the community. We're all in this together in this really strange way. And so advocating for one of us is advocating for all of us, but it's really essential that we get our voices out there. There are not enough AOCs, there are not enough Nanette Barragons and like Latina folks out in office. And like Dr. Fullerton said, creating an action plan, right? A tailored action plan that's going to help you get closer to your identity so that you can reauthor your own story and rewrite your narrative. Is there anything you would add here, Dr. Fullerton?
No, I love everything that you said. Really hit home on some significant points. Why that action plan is so important, because we say a lot of like, I wish I could, or I really want to do this. But unless you put a plan, an action plan behind what you want, nothing's going to change, right? So it's why in all the work that I do as a clinician, we make goals. My clients and I make goals because we've got something we've got to attain. We got to work towards. We got to make sure we're working towards, right? So when it comes to all these implicit biases, these messages that we're receiving, the storylines that were given to us that we not only heard but saw, but we embodied some of them, we felt some of them, right? What I always say is that we take what we learned or we heard and we treat it as gospel, like that's the truth. That's the end all be all. And then we just run with it. I love it when I hear my clients say, well, that's just who I am. And I go, really? That's who you are? So you're saying that that's in your genetic code. There's nothing you can do to change it. And that's when we really start having some rich conversations around, no, these were messages you took in to no fault of your own, because we take in messages. That's what we do. But what you decide to do with it now is your choice. And that's when my clients start to feel empowered, that they don't have to just take that gospel. They don't have to just take what they learned and heard and run with it. They can decide to do something different. So I got this picture on the right from my eldest child. This was my Mother's Day card. All right, this is what she drew for me. Super mom, love you, mom, with all these octopus arms, with all the things that I do. And to be honest, my first face when I saw it was this face. I was like, what the? This is who you think I am? Like, this is the message that I'm telling you about myself? But of course, I couldn't really do that. So instead, I gave her more of a this face. Okay, an awkward thank you. I love this picture so much. This picture held a mirror to my face. It made me think about what the messages I was sending to my own children. I have 2 daughters and a son. What messages was I sending to them? That I felt like I had to be super mom, that I felt like I had to do everything, that I had to have 8 arms and 8 legs and 8 heads. You know, I'm glad she put hearts, because at least I was like, well, at least she knows I love her, right? But other than that, I had to really think about, what message did I get that I'm still believing and tending to? And what message am I sending to my own children? So they got me to create this next image, which is what I believe hyper independence in Latinas can look like. It can look like issues with setting boundaries. It can look like issues with self-abandonment, avoiding our own pain and emotions, people pleasing, sacrificing our own self to maintain relationships, putting our own needs aside, constantly feeling like we have to be self sufficient and not asking for help, thinking we don't need any help, we can handle it all on our own, constantly trying to prove our worth, prove we're enough. This is a message I'm constantly hearing from my own clients. These are clients that like feel like they have to be super high achieving, have perfectionistic tendencies, constantly saying yes to extra work or extra assignments at work, extra commitments. And then we see it also as children who tend to be adultified when they were children. They took on a parentified role. So now as adults, they're the caretaker, they're the fixer, they're the strong one, right? And so these are the new narratives that have set in because of those internalized messages. And when I sent this picture out to my friends and coworkers who are Latinas, I had the funniest responses. I had, "Oh my God, this is me. When are you doing this workshop? Oh my God, I think this is 100% accurate, and I feel a little attacked," also with a smiley face, right? So all these messages came in of like, yes, spot on, you hit it right on the nail on the head. Raquel, I know when you saw this image, when I sent it to you, you saw it, you had a reaction to it as well.
I did have such a strong reaction to this image. I'd love to hear from anybody who's in the chat. Like, does any of this resonate with you? Maybe you're hearing about hyper independence for the first time, and maybe you want to learn more. So let us know how this graphic is hitting for you. For me in particular, I shared with Dr. Fullerton that learning about hyper independence was a huge turning point in my adult life. And this was when I was getting my social work master's degree from Cal State Long Beach, Go Beach. And I was struggling because part of the program had me interning in a mental health organization. I was shadowing intake sessions where individuals, typically in those intake sessions, individuals unfortunately have to recount a lot of traumatic experiences. And I happened to be in the room and with one of them where I had this really intense reaction to what she was sharing. And I just really shut down. I think it was more of like when you think about fight, flight, or freeze, I really froze. That let me know that I needed to seek out services. Thankfully, my school was connected to what's called the Long Beach Trauma and Recovery Center. And I had short sessions with a fellow MSW intern. I hope there's some interns here in this call because you can be so powerful in the work that you do. It was a fellow MSW intern who talked to me about hyper independence. And I mean, it was literally a moment where I felt like that meme where like you're frozen and everything around you was kind of going around. Everything that I had prided myself on turned out was part of the problem. I was super proud to be hyper independent, right? I don't need anybody. I've never needed anybody. And not to say that my parents were two individuals who were there for me. They were to provide, food and techo and all that. Like, that's great. But emotionally, that they weren't there to fulfill that because they themselves weren't in touch with their own emotions, right? And so I was the one that had to take care of them. I had to translate papers. I had to talk to bosses. I had to prepare them for a medical appointment. I had to translate the sentences they wrote down. They scribbled on a piece of paper at work so they could understand what people were saying to them. And so, in my late 20s, you couldn't convince me that I needed anybody. And I want to add something to that. A powerful storyline that I was raised with, that my mother shared with me this is probably the first lesson she ever shared with me, was that friends don't exist. In this country, friends don't exist, and you need to learn how to not trust other people. So in my late 20s, I was great at it. I didn't need anybody, proud to be antisocial, proud to not have a big friends group, because that means that I did it on my own. It was extremely harmful to my well-being and to my reality, to my desire to serve other people. It was harmful for me to not think about interdependence. That was the term that was then introduced to me. interdependence, meaning that you do have a relationship with the people around you, and you don't just take anything on your own, because that's not a realistic way to survive. And if I was someday going to serve other people in my community and help their well-being, I had to integrate this lesson for myself. And so I say this to anybody who may be kind of curious or interested in the term hyper independence. I strongly encourage you to look more into it, because not just as Latina women, but as women, like we're bombarded with messaging about being independent women. Like shout out to Destiny's Child Independent Woman song, right? We loved that was a bop. We loved it. Little did we know that we were integrating harmful messages, because we need one another. We cannot do this alone.
Yep. That picture of me, right? I'm a business owner. I run a large group practice. I, have a doctoral degree. So I was going to school to get multiple degrees throughout these last 20 years in the educational system. I also teach at a university in the counselor education department. I do these presentations locally and nationally. I'm doing so much, right? And the messaging that I got a lot was around shame. When I asked for things I needed, when I asserted my needs, sin vergüenza, how shameful of you, right? Just keep that kind of stuff to yourself. You can handle it on your own. When I finally was like, I cannot cook 3 meals a day, fresh meals every day for my family. I cannot keep up with cleaning this house and taking care of all my children and taking them to soccer practice and volleyball practice and dance. And I need support. Ay, sin vergüenza, how shameful that I couldn't handle it all by myself. When somebody was doing me wrong at a job and I wanted to tell them, hey, you can't talk to me that way. You can't treat me that way. Ay, sin vergüenza, for having some, shame in myself for trying to tell people that they did something wrong to me. That's the messaging I got, right? So that kind of closed me in to say, oh my God, just don't say anything. Just stay under the radar. Just don't go noticed, right? And such harm was done during that time where I didn't assert my needs, where I didn't go and ask for help, where I didn't put my needs first. So really, really consider this idea of hyper independence, and maybe some things you can even add to this picture, this graphic that I created, right? So just something I wanted to bring up, thought was really important during this presentation. All right, we've got about 5-6 minutes left. So some action steps that we really wanted to show you to begin to challenge and identify some of these harmful or unhelpful narratives. So 3 things to consider: your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors. So what thoughts come to mind when you internalize these types of narratives, right? Consider thoughts about yourself, about others, about society. What feelings come up for you when you internalize these types of narratives? And then what do you do when you have these feelings and thoughts come up, right? So for me, one of my behaviors, my go-to stress behaviors, I start to intensely clean, like baseboards and floors and mirrors, things that I really don't want to do, but I have this pent up stress and I don't know what else to do with it. So I just start cleaning, right? I start kind of digging at things. So start to consider your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors when these narratives start to come up for you. One of the things that I do with my own clients, I call these narrative tables, right? So I'm like, let's see what kind of narrative we're standing on, these tables that we're standing on. So think about the narrative for you. The one I put on here that I hear from my clients all the time is, if I don't keep working hard and achieve more, I won't be anything, or I won't be enough. And so I go, okay, that's your narrative, right? That's the thing you're working on. That's the thing that's giving you that fire, let's say, underneath you. What are examples of this? And I have them give me like table legs, examples of this being true, this narrative being true in their perspective. Then we start to talk about, okay, how how much good is that narrative giving you and how much harm is that narrative giving you? And normally my clients will definitely identify both the benefits and the drawbacks. And then I start to ask them, is that the narrative you want to continue to live by? If it is, so be it, right? But if it's not, then I say, what do you want your new narrative to be? Let's create a new table for you to stand on, right? So we can't go from I'm not enough, I'll never be enough, to I am enough. That's not how these kinds of things work, right? We're human beings. We have to pace ourselves. So what is a more kind of middle ground type of narrative that you could offer yourself that you can really believe in, right? So maybe something like, I can give myself breaks. I can do certain things without having to overwork, right? So just kind of think about your new narrative, what you might want that to be, and then give examples. So, you know what? When I took 3 days off by myself and I went to a hotel to kind of relax and recapture myself and who I am, the world didn't end. The world was just fine. The business was fine. The school was fine. The kids were fine. Everything was fine. I can take a break when I need to, right? So I can find new examples of a time where this narrative was also true, and a narrative that's healthier for me, that's more helpful. The other tool that I want to offer you all today is what is called a SUDS, Subjective Units of Distress Scale. And it's something that I have my clients do on a daily basis to check in with themselves, right? So think about ourselves in terms of like a 1 through 10 scale, or colored like green to red, right? Think about those intense emotions, anxiety, depressive based emotions, distress, whatever that big, major, intense feeling, anger sometimes that comes up for you, and start paying attention. How often is it coming up? When does it start to come up? Are there certain triggers that make it come up more than others? How often are you at that high level on a daily basis, right? We want to shoot for kind of being at a 3 to 4 every day. That's kind of like our chill mood. We're not distressed. We can be alert. We can be concentrating. We feel good, right? If you're heading into the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on a daily, on a regular basis, there's something else going on that I need you to go pay attention to, right? And that's why the SUDS daily check-in is a really good skill for you to have, to be paying attention to yourself and your needs a little bit more. Raquel, can you just kind of quickly go through some of these statistics and why it is that we do need to be paying attention to ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, on top of all the experience we've described here, here's what some of the research is saying. Latinx experience higher rates of depression than any other racial or ethnic group. And since 1981, CDC surveys have consistently shown us that Latina adolescents aged 10 to 24, in particular, they attempt suicide at rates much higher than their African American and non-Latina white and Latino white and male boys. You see here that 1 in 4 children identify as Hispanic or Latinx or Latina, and 1 in 4 women identify as such. Latinos are at higher risk for depression than their non-Hispanic white and African American peers. And Latina or Hispanic women in the U.S. experience depression at about twice the rate of their Latino Hispanic male peers. Moreover, there's additional factors, including motherhood, social determinants of health, immigration status, that also play a significant role in the development or the aggravation of mental health concerns. That includes depression, anxiety, PTSD, and the list on there could go on and on.
So this is so important because we as Latinas are a large number in the United States. 1 in 4 children and 1 in 4 women, right? So we make up such a huge population. And if we're having these consistent issues, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and so on, it's going to impact a large population of people. So important for us to keep ourselves and what's happening with us in mind and be aware of it, and then go seek service if we need it. Other really quick things: Creative arts have been shown to work really well with us, painting and poetry and writing and, all types of creative arts, joining support groups, recognizing our intergenerational wealth, right? That's where the history and our stories that empower us come into place. Our saying la cultura cura, right? So literally understanding and knowing the power of our culture is going to help to heal us. And then this that I created is like this daily check-in. In English, seeds; in Spanish, darse, which means to give back to yourself. We need to be paying attention to these things on a regular basis. How are we sleeping? How are we eating? Are we getting exercise? Are we paying attention to our doctor's orders and our physical health? And are we doing self-care things for ourselves, right? I talked about like some readings that we could do. So, I have an example of like books and articles that talk about ourselves and our history and, help to give us kind of empowerment and a sense of self and worth. So go find some readings would be really great too during this time. All right. So what did you learn? I want you to consider one takeaway from this presentation, the big takeaway for yourself that you're not going to forget and you're going to do something about. 2, that action step. I need you to do something for yourself. 3, one skill. Maybe it's, I'm going to try some creative arts, or I'm going to go try some of this narrative table, or I'm going to try that daily suds, right? And then one way to care for yourself. It could be reading, it could be cooking, it could be creative arts, it could be exercising. Lots of ways to care for ourselves, right? Spiritual healing, right? So think about all those 4 things. I hope you got one of each by the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for being with us. We are here to support you in any way we can. Please reach out to us. Here's our contact for me and Raquel. We so enjoyed being with you today. Raquel, thank you so much for co-hosting this session with me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here, Latina Professionals, for the platform. And please, if you have any more questions, please find us on LinkedIn where we'd love to chat. But if not, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day and happy Mental Health Awareness Month.
Bye everyone.